just gone 25 to 1. Some news just in: a senior nurse who drugged patients for an easy shift has been sentenced to 7 years, 2 months in prison. 54-year-old Catherine Hudson worked on the stroke unit at the Blackpool Victoria Hospital. She used an unprescribed drug to sedate 2 patients. This was between February 2017 and November 2018. Her colleague Charlotte Wilmot, an assistant practitioner, was sentenced to 3 years for conspiring with Hudson and encouraging her to sedate a patient. The pair also admitted stealing prescription-only drugs. Every so often on this show, I call my editor and say, look, there's somebody I really want to interview. It's Christmas is coming, and your present to me will be to get me Geddy Lee to interview, because he's got a book out. Now, at that stage, I hadn't read the book. Imagine my delight when I read it and just found it to be completely fascinating on all sorts of levels. And Geddy is the legendary musician, rock star, if you like, frontman of the band Rush. And the book is called My Effin Life, reflects on his family and childhood, the history of the band, love of music, and so on. And I got my wish. Christmas has come early because Geddy Lee joins me. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Adrian. How are you?
Yes. Listen, thanks very much for coming on. For just those who might not be familiar with Rush, just give us some sort of facts and figures, because I think bands that stay together for so long often don't get the credit for doing so. Somehow you make more noise by splitting up, having a big fight or whatever, than getting back together on a reunion tour and all that. But how long were you together?
Well, the band formed when I was just a teenager, with Alex and our original drummer, John Rutsey. But in 1974, we met this chap named Neil Peart, who turned out to be one of the greatest drummers in rock history. And he joined with Alex and myself to form a bond that would stay together for over 40 years. And we toured and recorded multiple records until our final show together in August of 2015. So it was quite a fulsome career, you would say.
Look, it's an amazing body of work. And look, we'll get on to that. I was absolutely fascinated by your sort of family history and your childhood, because I mean your parents weren't Canadian. Your parents, well, they ended up Canadian, but they came from elsewhere, didn't they? From Poland.
Yeah, they were Polish born in a small town just outside of, for lack of better description, in the middle of Poland. And of course, they were Jewish, from a Jewish settlement, and they ended up in numerous concentration camps throughout the war and barely survived by the skin of their teeth. And my father and mother had actually met in one of these camps, and they found each other again at the end of the war, got married, and then emigrated to Canada. So I'm lucky to be here.
I mean, it's just an amazing story. So you had quite an Orthodox Jewish upbringing in Canada.
Yeah, well, my mother came from an Orthodox family. My father was not a religious man, but he did a good job of pretending to be so for my mother. You know what they say, happy wife, happy life. So, I was brought up in a sort of a moderately religious household. And when my dad passed away when I was 12, of course, I had a number of duties to perform for his passing, which gave me sort of a year away from being a normal kid. And when that year was over, I found music with a fever and a vengeance and decided that was the life for me.
I mean, I think you write brilliantly, if I may say so, about the Jewish approach to death and the grieving process. And just, I mean, it's incredibly intense for any 12-year-old, but there's almost special sort of pressure on you with the role you have to play at that age.
Yeah, well, I was 12. I was the eldest male child, and so I had responsibilities and duties as such to, go to synagogue, to say 3 prayers a day in the morning before school, and then the afternoon and evening after school, which I dutifully did for 11 months and 1 day. So it was a fairly dark year for me. But when that was over, I wanted out of that world. I was desperate to catch up to all my friends that were listening to all these cool bands in the mid 60s. And I think in some strange way, I credit that with my fever to be a musician.
So it began as rebellion, you'd say, but you had some. It was really interesting that you had no idea your father had musical bones, any interest in music, but this is something you found out much later, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it was fascinating and bowled me over. I was visiting. We were already successful, and I was touring through Detroit, Michigan, where I had some cousins, and I was speaking to an aunt of mine, and she told me that my dad used to play balalaika at weddings and, bar mitzvahs and things like that after the war. And I just couldn't believe my ears. And of course, I ran home to confront my mother with this fact. And she was rather sheepish because I think she had said to my dad when they emigrated that you can't take your instrument with you. It's excess baggage. And so maybe she felt a little guilt. But man, I would have loved to have known that as a child, that he had a musical aptitude.
So what was the moment for you, the turning point when that I'm going to be a musician? Was there one piece of music that made your hair stand on end?
I think when I first heard the Yardbirds back in the mid 60s, there was a song called For Your Love that really got me. And in those days, I was listening to whatever came on the radio and scraping a few, pennies together to buy records. But I think when I met Alex Lifeson and we started playing together, there was a band called The Cream with Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce, and Ginger Baker that really cemented our dream. We dreamt to be a trio fashioned after them.
And I mean, you didn't set out wanting to be a bass player, but I think you literally drew the short straw, didn't you, to be the one to play the bass?
Yeah, well, that's what we joke about in the music business, that no one chooses to be a bass player. You're just voted to be the bass player. But I really took to it. I loved it. And there was 2 less strings than a guitar, so it was a little bit easier. But I became obsessed with being the best bass player I could.
And I mean, you've got a particular way of playing. I mean, it's a virtuoso on your instrument. And I mean, there's one track you refer to, and I've almost got a playlist of every track you mention in your book, because I found it so interesting. When you talk about when the bass does a lot of the work carrying the melody, and you mention Midnight Hour. I think we can just put that on with Wilson Pickett. But after this little intro, you can hear exactly what you were talking about at the bass carrying the melody now, if you listen. And you talk about and you talk about sort of tapping that out, tapping it along to the bass line when you were in your mom's car and so on.
Yeah, no, it was those Motown songs. We live not far from Detroit, and so Motown music was really influential as a kid. And of course, the great bass player James Jamerson played on a lot of those records, and so the bass was loud and clear. And so driving with my mom's car on the way to work was a huge influence. And
there's another one, a track I hadn't heard before you mentioned it, a band I hadn't heard of actually, called The Paupers. And you said this bass player was your first hero, and you can hear exactly why when you listen to it. It's just that right urgent bass playing right up front in the mix. Just have a quick listen to that.
Power of a smooth, clean shave in the palm of your hand. Its blades conform perfectly to your head to ensure no nick.
Okay, so there it's starting to sound like Rush already. That was the kind of feel you had in initially, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm so glad you played that track, because Denny Gerard was my first bass hero, and And I haven't heard that song in a while, so it's great to hear it. But yeah, they had an urgency, and he was an amazing bass player. Of course, not many people outside of Canada have heard of him, but it brings back super fond memories to me.
So, I mean, what I found extraordinary is just you founded Rush, and you're doing sort of very heavy, very loud, very noisy stuff. And it's just an absolute slog. You're just playing gigs almost every night to, as you put it, sort of indifference, a lot of the time, but you just kept sticking at it no matter what. I mean, where does that come from? That's almost bloody-minded self-belief that you're just going to keep doing it.
Well, it's not like we had a lot of options. We loved what we were doing. We were lucky enough to get gigs, and it just, we weren't a pop band. We understood that we're not going to be heard on top 40 radio. So the way to the fans' hearts was by playing, getting in front of them and playing. And so we did that night after night after night. And at one point on one tour, I think we did 36 gigs in a row in different cities, driving 300 miles a night after each gig. So we were the quintessential road band, trying to make it on our live reputation.
Mm-hmm. And you talk a lot about playing in sort of working men's clubs, and I mean, they might have wanted something sort of quieter to listen to, but if we can play the track "Finding My Way" on the first album, I'll just imagine you just thrashing this out really loud, and then looking up, and then there's sort of 10 working blokes there just drinking a cold beer, glassy-eyed, wondering what are these three hairy youths up to. Let's just play a little bit of that one. But you're right about, you just didn't compromise, though, did you? That you could have had an easier life by playing quieter, playing other stuff, doing covers would be the obvious choice to get the bookings, but you just refused to do it.
Well, we needed to follow our dream. And of course, our early songs were quite raw, and you don't really realize it at the time because you're young and you think you're as good as the heroes that you're following, but we had a long way to go, so we just kept at it. And I don't know, we were stubborn and refused to give in to the pressures of our management to write pop songs. And I don't think we really knew how to write pop songs, to be honest. We just had to be who we were.
And did your mum come round to your career choice? But I mean, how long did it take her to realise this is where you were going, no matter what?
Well, when I quit school, she was heartbroken, and I was about 16 when I did that. But within a few years, she saw us on television, and that suddenly clicked into her immigrant brain that, oh, he's an entertainer. So finally, she had something she could say to her sister, brother, and family members when they asked, why isn't your son in school? Now she could say, oh, he's an entertainer. He's on TV. So I think that made her a little bit proud. And finally, she sort of could explain why I had left school.
I mean, it's interesting. You've had 3 names in your life, as far as I can see, because on your birth certificate, it's Gershon, is it, your first name? And
well, I was born, my parents named me after my grandfather who'd been murdered in the Holocaust, and he named me Gershon Eliezer Weinrib. And of course, that was anglicized for school, which turned into Geddy Lee Weinrib. But in the early part of my life, my mother had forgotten what my middle name was and had written an incorrect name on my school certificate. So there was a lot of confusion when I was about 16, 17, trying to get on with my life.
And so where did Geddy come from then?
I had a friend who I had met in my little suburb of Toronto, and he heard my mother calling me for dinner one night, like, Geddy, come in the house. And he thought she was saying Geddy, not Gary. And he said to me, why is she calling you Geddy? I said, well, she's not. She just has a very thick accent. And so he just started calling me Geddy, and then all my friends started calling me that. And before I knew it, my sister, my brother were calling me that. And so eventually I legally just changed my name to it.
I mean, you write something about yourself as a kid. That you don't get this in many books. You write, it's a common mistake to assume that when a kid, or an adult for that matter, is quiet, he must be some sort of deep thinker. In my case, I'm afraid it was simply that I didn't have much to say. Not all still waters run deep. I mean, I think you've been a bit unfair on yourself, surely, there. I mean, you also write, I did my schoolwork in my usual unnoticeable and less than stellar manner with no particular passion for any particular subject. I mean, was it really like that?
Well, that's how I felt as a kid. But when I look back after writing this book and spending so much time turning over the stones of my youth, I must have had more nerve than I gave myself credit for. I always saw myself as kind of a shy wallflower type of kid, but there I was, joining bands. And when one band didn't work out, I would recruit other musicians and start another band. So I was a pretty determined kid after all, it seems.
I mean, if you just jump forward to when you had this incredibly successful album, Moving Pictures, and this anthem, Tom Sawyer, this track, just play a bit of it, just so we can sort of place the time and the music a bit. Can we just play Tom Sawyer?
A Monday warrior, mean stride. Today's Tom Sawyer, mean pride.
It feels like sacrilege to talk over it, but so by now you're dominating. You're playing huge stadia, but still it's relentless. Still you're touring all the time. Did it remain fun?
Yeah, of course it was fun, but at times it was wearying. But the glorious stamina of youth.
Yeah. And
kept it up as long as we could.
Yeah. And you sang, I mean, it was, but what I'm getting at, it's still just such incredibly hard work, away from home a lot and so on.
Yeah, of course. And I was fairly obsessed with my career most of that period. And of course, it did take its toll on family life. And there were times where it was very difficult. My wife had a very independent mind, and she had a dream of her own to be in fashion, and she was following that dream, and I was following my dream. So we were hanging on by a thread there for a while, but thankfully we made it work, and we started to listen to each other, and we're still married to this day, thankfully.
So. In terms of raising your own kids, I just wonder what your advice for people would be with kids. Like, if I was sort of your parent, going back, I was thinking, well, you want to dream, but to have this one-track, relentless focus on doing one thing, it isn't sensible, but it worked out in your case. I mean, what if one of your kids wanted to do something at which there was a really small chance of success, like wanted to be a great baseball pitcher or hitter, for example, and wouldn't do anything else and left school and just focused on it no matter what, then what would you do? Would you entertain that dream or just try and bring some common sense into it?
Well, yeah, I think you have to support them. I think you have to always point out that, there are other things in life to make sure your options are open. But for example, my daughter, she wanted to be an actor, and she was passionate, and she followed that dream. And we arranged for her to go to a great school in New York for dramatic arts, the NYU Tisch School, and she did that. And she went out and pounded the pavement for years afterwards. And eventually, she got to the point where she realized, this is not making me happy. all these rejections and all these auditions, and she found another avenue of creative exploration and expression. And now she's a fantastic floral designer, and she loves it with a passion, and she's never been happier. So I think you have to give your children latitude to find out for themselves, give them support, but always reassure them that you can always change. There's always another option for you.
So I've got lots of texts in, a lot of love for you. Somebody said, I don't normally watch the clock to see how much time the interview's left, but, you know, there's people panicking. It's got to finish any minute now. They're loving hearing you so much, Geddy. There was an interesting text from somebody called Ross in Campbelltown. And I don't know if you're familiar with a show called Top of the Pops we have here for right the way through the 70s, 80s, 90s and on. It was like the pop show, so whatever was in the charts, we played it. And if the band couldn't perform it or mime it in the studio, there was a troupe of dancers who used to perform it. And there was one bunch called Legs & Co. And this guy, Ross, says that the Legs & Co. interpreting Spirit of Radio on Top of the Pops in 1980 was quite something. I'm not familiar with that. I just wondered if you were. I urge you to look it up if you're not.
No, I'm not familiar with that. I'm, of course, aware of Top of the Pops, and I had heard that somebody had done a rendition of that song.
But it's not easy to dance to. I would. I don't find anything easy to dance to, but I'll be looking at that sort of straight after the show. I must say. So, I mean, looking back, I mean, it can be quite traumatic writing a memoir as intense as this. You know, does it? I don't know, does it make you sad? Does it make you proud? Does it just make you a bit of everything?
Well, you know, when I started this memoir, I was in a very dark place because my friend and bandmate for over 40 years, Neil Peart, had just passed away in January of 2020. So I had some work to do on myself to get past that moment. It was quite a sad moment. At the same time, I was watching my mother descend into dementia. So I started thinking that, you know, I don't know how long I can hold on to my memories. So I started writing them down. And yes, at times it was emotional and difficult, but in the end, it's been incredibly cathartic for me. And it's helped me, relive a lot of great moments and, you know, a lot of sad moments. But I think I'm just really feel I'm a better person for having gone through all that. And so I consider myself an incredibly fortunate man to have had the career I had and to be able to overcome some of these sadder parts of my life.
And if there's one moment being on stage you'll always treasure, can you think of one? I mean, there's been so many where you just thought, God, this is beautiful. I can't believe I'm here.
Yeah, no, I've had some amazing moments, but more recently, I think the performance we did at Wembley in 2022, in September of 2022, for Taylor Hawkins' tribute that the Foo Fighters organized. And it was a 6-7 hour performance with some incredible musicians, you know, Paul McCartney, Chrissie Hynde, Queens of the Stone Age guys, Foo Fighters, and on and on and on. And it was just an incredibly memorable show, and it was the first time Alex and I had really performed our songs for quite some time, since Neil had passed away and since our last show.
Yeah,
really a memorable gig.
Okay, listen, fantastic book, and it's a real joy to speak to you and to read it. So congratulations on everything you've achieved.
Thank you, Adrian.
All the best. That's Geddy Lee. The book is brilliant, genuinely. My Effin Life, it's called. And he's on tour talking about it in, where are we going? Glasgow, Portsmouth, and in the Barbican in the coming days. Thanks for that. Thanks for listening. It's nearly 1 o'clock.
The voice of the UK. This is BBC Radio 5 Live.